Welcome to our third episode of Ava Chats. I'm Laura Stocker, a graphic designer and artist based in Eastern North Carolina. I'm also a proud board member of the Ava Gardner Museum and an active volunteer with the museum's social media team. Today, I'm very excited to host a special episode of Ava Chats in honor of Mother's Day. Our guests for today's conversation include a returning Ava Chats participant, Linnell Seabold, as well as a new, very special guest, Ava Thompson. I want to thank you both for joining me today for this event and this conversation. Linnell Seabold is the executive director of the Ava Gardner Museum. She's been with the museum since July 2016. She has a background in business and accounting. She's a transplant from San Diego, California, and now happily calls Johnston County, North Carolina, her home. Ava Thompson is the trustee of the Ava Gardner Trust, as well as the great niece and namesake of Ava Gardner. She's a retired educator who served as a high school English teacher, a middle school and high school principal, and a district level administrator. Ava is also recently retired from semi-professional drag racing. We are so honored to have you both here today to talk about Ava. And in honor of Mother's Day, we will be discussing the Gardner family with a special emphasis on the resilient women of the Gardner family. Ava Gardner was born the youngest of 7 children, and she grew up with 4 older sisters and 1 older brother to look up to. The Gardner children in birth order were Beatrice, Elsie Mae, Inez, Raymond, who tragically passed away before Ava was born, Jack, Myra, then Ava. All of Ava's siblings were significantly older than her. Ava's sisters were creative, business-minded, independent women, each in their own way. Ava's mother, Molly, was a strong woman who had high expectations, strict rules, and lots of love for her children. Molly worked throughout Ava's life to help support the family. After Ava's father passed away, when she was only 15, Molly continued to provide for Ava and herself. Each of these women had an impact on Ava, making her the independent, passionate woman she was throughout her life. Ava Thompson grew up knowing or hearing family stories about all of these wonderful women. And so without further ado, I'm going to ask Linnell and Ava to join me as we explore and celebrate the Gardner women in today's episode of Ava Chats.
Hi, everyone, and I really want to thank you for joining us, and especially I want to thank our special guest, Ava Thompson, who is here to, as Laura mentioned, discuss the Gardner family and in particular the Gardner siblings. Most of Ava's sisters were quite a bit older than her. We thought to start, we might go through some pictures of the family, and Ava will be able to give us a brief little rundown on each one of the siblings. So Laura, if you'd like to share your screen with us, we can go through those family photos.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Molly and Jonas Gardner, Ava's parents. This is their wedding portrait. I will probably be referring to Molly as Mama Gardner throughout our talk today, and to Jonas as Papa Gardner. This is such a wonderful picture for me. And standing in the middle is Mama Gardner. And of course, to her left is Papa Gardner. To her right is Ava Virginia Gardner. And this was my Aunt Ava's Aunt Ava, and she lived with the family for many years and had a tremendous impact, in my opinion, on Ava. In the middle, below Mama Gardner, is Beatrice Elizabeth. We will be referring to her as Bappy. She was the oldest of the 6 Gardner children, and to her left is my grandmother, Elsie Mae. I will be referring to her as Mama Creech, most likely during our chat this morning. To Bappy's right is Inez, and all three of these little girls, or little ladies, as Ava Gardner called them, were just absolutely rock foundations of the family. And oh my goodness, this is Mama Gardner as she is older. When I never knew Molly or Mama Gardner. She died, I think, in 1943, perhaps, and I was not born until 49. So I didn't know her firsthand, but I feel like I know a lot about her just from hearing the Gardner children talk about her, and also from reading what has been written about her. I was the child who was in the room playing and seeming to be distracted from adult conversation, but I'm surprised at my current age at just how much I absorbed as a child. And this is Ava and Bappy. And this was another pose or another shot taken the day that the Discovery photo was taken. And Bappy accompanied Ava to Hollywood and stayed with her for many, many years, ended up a resident of Los Angeles. Although Ava was the youngest and Bappy was the oldest, they were very close. Bappy was actually old enough to be her mother. Bappy was married in October of 1922, and Ava was born in December of 1922. So that should illustrate the great age span between the Gardner children. And this is my grandmother, Elsie Mae, and Ava in 1978, when Ava came home to attend a large celebration at Rock Ridge High School. And Ava is holding my Uncle Jack's little dog in the photo. I love this picture too because Ava and Mama Creech look so relaxed and so happy. Ava once said that she absolutely adored Elsie Mae. My grandmother, Mama Creech, was probably the most easygoing of the Gardner children. And this is Aunt Inez. She and my grandmother were very close through the years. My grandmother was, of course, next to the oldest, and then Inez was below her. Bappy, being the oldest, was away with Ava. So that left Mama Creech and Inez to spend many, many, many hours together and to really enjoy each other. And this is just the sweetest little photo. This is Raymond Allison. Allison was his middle name. And my dad was given his middle name. My dad's name is David Allison. Little Raymond was tragically killed when he was 2 years, 2 months, and 15 days old, a number that has often been quoted among the Gardner children. And we'll talk a little more about Raymond. And this is my Uncle Jack and Ava. Uncle Jack's name is actually Jonas Melvin. He and my dad were in business together. He lived only a block away from us. So I got to see a lot of Uncle Jack as well. He was the only male child because Raymond did not survive. So he was kind of the boss. And I just absolutely adore this photo. This is Myra and her infant, not really infant, but very young daughter, Jean, standing in front of their families. The family had a diaper service, so they are standing in front of the diaper delivery truck. And I just think this is just a wonderful picture. Myra and Ava were, although there was 7 years between them, they were very close, especially later in life after Myra lost her husband and her children were grown. They ended up great friends and great companions. And of course, this is Ava. This photo was taken in 1949, and she is sitting on the porch of the home place in Grabtown. And this picture is just so much fun. These are the Gardner children, with the exception of Ava, who was away. And from my right to left, my right looking at the camera, the first lady is Elsie Mae, my grandmother, Mama Creech. And then the only brother, Jonas Melvin, Uncle Jack. And then Inez, Bappy, and Myra. This brings back many good memories. I was just turned 12 in this photo. It was my first trip to New York to visit Ava without someone taking me there. They actually put me on the airplane and I flew by myself to New York. And Ava met me at the airport. This was taken at the very famous Stork Club. Walter Chiari, Ava's date, was presenting me with a flower. The hands to Ava's, or the hands beside of Ava, the male hands, that is Sherman Billingsley, and he is the owner, or was the owner of the Stork Club, and a very famous New York restaurateur.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much for running through those pictures with us and identifying everybody so we all know who we're talking about. You mentioned the one picture where Ava is sitting on her front porch in Grabtown. That was in 1949, and 1949 is a pretty important year for you. That was you were born. And if you can tell us how, I understand that there was a conversation between your dad, who was known as Al, and Ava after she found out that Al and his wife were pregnant. She had a special request, and this is how you became Ava's namesake. If you could share that story with us.
Okay. The Ford car dealer in Smithfield, named Brat Wilson, gave a party in Ava's honor when she came home. That party was at the Johnston County Country Club, and many friends were at the party and lots of family. And my mother was not very far along in her pregnancy, and she was still experiencing some not only morning sickness, but sickness throughout the day. And she didn't feel well, so she and my dad had to leave the party early. And Ava followed them to the car and said, if this baby is a little girl, I want you to name her after me. And of course, Mom and Dad agreed to do that. And then the whole family actually came together to pick out the middle name. And my middle name is Carol. And there are 5 generations of Avas in our family. And the very first Ava was Ava Virginia. You saw a picture of her. She was sister to Ava's father, Jonas. And then there was Ava Lavinia. And then 3rd generation me, Ava Carol. I have a daughter, Ava Melissa, and a granddaughter, Ava Isabella. And the interesting thing for me about the naming is that my middle name is the only one that does not end in a soft A.
Well, that makes you special.
Well, or maybe it makes me just stick out like a sore thumb.
I do love the relationship between your dad and Ava. They were cousins, but they actually grew up. They were so close in age. They grew up more like brother and sister, didn't they?
Well, they were niece and nephew. There was not much difference in their ages, less than 2 years. And they were playmates. They grew up together. Ava felt like she was my dad's appointed defender when it came to the other mean boys on the playground. The story has often been told that those mean boys took all my dad's marbles away from him, and Ava won every one of them back and then stood them down, saying, you're not having the marbles back. You're going to have to fight me first. But anyway, I think because Ava and Dad were good friends and remained so throughout life, that is the reason that I became the namesake, and feel very honored that she did give me her name.
That's wonderful. That photo that we showed of Ava on the front porch, that is the farmhouse where she was born in Grabtown, as you mentioned. I think it would be great for our fans to hear a little bit about what Ava's upbringing was like. You know, so much has been written about her over the years, and I know there's from time to time some things that aren't quite accurate that are said. It's often said that she grew up dirt poor, and people kind of say that outside of the context of understanding that she grew up at a time when there were issues in the agricultural landscape at the time. Her family were cotton and tobacco farmers, and there was an influx of the boll weevil, which caused them to have several years of bad crops. And that was right on the cusp of the Great Depression, when everyone was having some financial hardship. So if you could tell a little bit about what her childhood would have been like, that life for your grandmother as well, I think our fans would enjoy hearing that, and we can correct sort of that dirt poor or statement that gets made quite often.
Well, I think the best way to explain that would be to use Ava's own words. And she said that if we were poor, then she didn't know that they were poor, because everybody in the community was in the same boat. Everybody was experiencing lean times, but the house that was in the picture was built by Papa Gardner. He was a skilled carpenter, and it was a big house. There were 6 bedrooms in the house, and he and his brother Ben owned a very large tract of land there in Grabtown, and the major crops were tobacco and cotton. In addition, Papa Gardner had a sawmill and a cotton gin. The family had a big garden. I have heard Ava say at one point that it was at least an acre, maybe more. And everybody in the community had something to offer, something to contribute. If Mama Gardner had lots of fresh vegetables that they canned for the winter months, you know, there were always vegetables, and the farm next door may have dairy cows, and so they had milk and butter to offer. And still another farm may have had cows that were slaughtered for beef to eat. And so everybody had something that they could contribute to the welfare of the community, and they traded back and forth and bartered with the general store in the area. So because they were generous with one another and acted as a community, everybody fared well during those pre-Depression and Depression years. And more than that, I mean, they had a warm bed, a good sturdy house. They had good food to eat. In addition to that, Ava said, we were loved. And that was her childhood. She has been noted to say many, many times that she had a wonderful childhood. And her siblings say the same thing.
And it started at that farmhouse. And then, like you said, when the Depression hit and the community worked together as best they could, the family did have a little bit of kind of upheaval and change, trying to look for more work opportunities. If you would share a little bit about that and how the family sort of transitioned from living at the farmhouse and then moved down the road a bit.
Right. Well, Grabtown is just a crossroads. Brogden, about a mile away, was more. There was a store there and a teacherage and a school. So it was more of the hub of that area of Johnston County. Lots of unfortunate things happened. Uncle Jack was a little fella, but he was in the cotton gin and he was trying to smoke a cigarette. He dropped the match in the seed house and the cotton gin burned down. That was a tremendous blow to the family and led to some very hard times. Along about the same time, Jonas's brother Ben sold the farm and left the area, went to another part of Johnston County, and without all of that vast farmland and the cotton gin gone, Papa Gardner was in a difficult situation. So Mama Gardner took over the teacherage, which was a boarding house for single teachers, and it was right beside of the school. And that's how she contributed to the support of the family during some of the leanest times. Does that help answer your question?
Just to go back a little bit, you briefly touched on the tragedy of losing Raymond at a young age prior to Ava's birth, in fact. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened to Raymond?
I will. The sisters especially talked about and rehashed this tragedy many times through the years, and decades later, I have watched them weep as they talked about losing Raymond. And I think that was their way of coping, or one of the ways that they coped with this tragedy. But, he was lost before Ava and Myra were born. When the tragedy occurred, Mama Gardner was pregnant with Jack. And Bappy was 7 years old, I believe. And Bappy is the one who tells the story most compellingly. It was early one morning before light, and there was a knock on the door, and there was some men asking Papa Gardner for some blasting caps. They were clearing some land and bringing up logs for the sawmill. And Papa Gardner went into the bedroom and opened the dresser to get them out. And in the meantime, Mama Gardner had Raymond in the kitchen, and she gave him a cheese biscuit. She was just famous for her big, wonderful, fluffy biscuits. And she just handed the cheese biscuits to little Raymond and told him to go in the bedroom where there was an open fireplace because it was warmer in there. So he was standing, close to the fireplace, eating his cheese biscuit and staying warm. And Papa Gardner was getting the blasting caps out of the dresser, and he happened to drop one and did not realize that he had. He left to give the men the blasting caps. Mama Gardner came in to tidy up and sweep, and unknowingly swept the blasting cap into the open fireplace, and it exploded. Little Raymond had severe, life-threatening abdominal injuries, and Bappy tells how Mama Gardner scooped him up and took him to the back porch and laid him on an ironing board that was set up there permanently. I mean, the ironing board stayed set up on the back porch all the time because of the big volume of laundry. And she put him on the ironing board to examine his injuries and immediately realized that they had to have some medical help for him. So she bundled him up, and they took him by horse and wagon, which is all they had, to Smithfield. They saw a doctor there, and that doctor sent them on to Raleigh, where he could get the medical help that he needed, but he didn't make it. He died on the way. And Bappy, when she talks about little Raymond, she says he was a beauty, so pretty. And when I look at his little picture, I can't help but think about what Bappy had to say. And Papa, he was buried in Wilson County, and Papa Gardner was always really dissatisfied with that. Went round and round about whether or not to have him moved back to Johnston County, but never did before he died. And Aunt Myra brought him home to Johnston County from Wilson County maybe 10, 15 years ago, but recently. So the whole family is together at Sunset Memorial Gardens there in Smithfield, including Ava, except for Bappy, who is buried in California, and Myra, who is buried in Winston-Salem.
And Myra's buried there because that is where her children and her husband were married. Her daughter sadly died before she did. And then her husband also had passed away. So that's why she was in Winston-Salem.
Exactly.
Well, that's just an unimaginable experience that, as you said, it resonated and stayed with the children long after the event happened. And that was such a tough thing for Molly to go through, especially, being pregnant at the time and just all the pressures and things of just, surviving, trying to move forward. And I know that is a trait that is very much a hallmark of the Gardner family to, despite any adversity, to keep going and keep moving forward. We mentioned the kind of timeline of that event would have happened before Ava was born, of course, before Jack or Myra were born. So they were still living at the farmhouse. And then previously we talked about them moving to the teacherage in the Brogden community. After, during the Great Depression, they had yet another hardship happen that the state of North Carolina, trying to save money during the Depression years, did close that particular teacherage in Brogden. And the family once again had a moment of kind of upheaval. At this point, I believe, I think Ava was the only child still at home, but they relocated. If you tell a little bit about that and then kind of their journey back to North Carolina.
Okay. they moved to Newport News, Virginia, and Mama Gardner ran a boarding house for shipyard workers. And of course, all of those fellas really loved her Southern cooking. She was such a good cook. But that was a really difficult time. Papa Gardner was sick and he died while they were in Newport News. And that left just Mama Gardner and Ava. And Mama Gardner had very little help. So that was probably the poorest period of time that Ava experienced. She talks about having one skirt and one sweater, and she would wash those in the evening, or at night, so that they would be fresh and ready for the next day to go to school. And I have often mused about how having so few clothes as a child, that is why she loved clothes so much as a grown-up and ended up dressed by the world's greatest couture designers. And finally, a position opened up in Wilson for a lady to manage a teacherage, and that is when Mama Gardner and Ava came back to this area, not to Johnston County, but to neighboring Wilson County.
And that is where Ava went to high school, at the high school next to, near the teacherage, and graduated from high school. That's the little community of Rock Ridge.
Yes, exactly. There are so many things from Ava's background that I attribute to what she was like as an adult. She was so much like her mother, Mama Gardner. Mama Gardner was a happy, cheerful, fun-loving person. She loved to have company. She enjoyed people. And Ava was like that. She had her mother's personality. Ava said that her father was calm and careful, but her mother just bursted with enthusiasm. And that was just so much like Ava. She also said that her mother had a natural warmth. And everyone who knows Ava or spent any time with her will tell you what a kind, warm, and compassionate person that she was. She was also influenced greatly by her father. He was keenly interested in politics, and that trickled down to Ava. She was always well-read and in the know about what was going on politically, not only in the United States, but around the world. She just stayed with what was currently happening. And I think that her keen interest in politics certainly came from her father. Her humble background during the Depression accounts for her love of the finer things in life. She loved fine china. She loved silver flatware. She loved fine table linens, and she loved to entertain. And I think that stems back to the Depression, because in the Depression, no one had those things, or at least no one that she knew. Only the very wealthy elite had china and silver flatware and those things that Ava appreciated so much in her adult years. Ava sent me dolls from all over the world. Just dozens and dozens of dolls. And I think it was because when she was a little girl, she had only one doll. And she loved that doll dearly. And she left it outside one night and it rained. And it was made of composition and it came all to pieces and she was heartbroken. So she compensated by sending me all the dolls that she never had.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about the sisters. They were all very strong in their own right. There were 5 sisters and 16 years between Ava and Bappy. So they're different ages, different businesses, but they all were very independent minded. And you got to know all of them throughout your childhood because you spent time with them as a family. So can you tell us a little bit more about the sisters and their dynamic together?
Well, Mama Creech and Inez were very close because they lived close together and they were close together in age, and they had lots of fun. When they were together, I have never seen 2 human beings that could get so tickled over the slightest thing as Mama Creech and Inez could. Starting back with Bappy, she was quite a character. I just absolutely loved Bappy. She smoked, as all the Gardner sisters did. She drank. She was masterful in the use of 4-letter words. She loved the horse races. So she was a gambler as well. But even with all of that, she was absolutely adorable. She loved letter writing and sending telegrams and expected replies. And when I would get letters and telegrams, I would work very hard to send something back that Aunt Bappy would enjoy. So I learned to be a good pen pal. And Aunt Bappy worked in the best department stores. She always smelled so good because she knew what the best perfumes were. And she had the most interesting handbags, but we called them pocketbooks back in those days. And she would let me play in her pocketbooks. And my excuse for wanting her pocketbook was to find some chewing gum, but really, I loved to take everything out piece by piece and examine it and get to know what it was. And she had no objections as long as I was entertained. So Bappy was quite special to me, as was, we'll skip over my grandmother for the time being, and so was Inez. Inez, our backyard, for a while anyway, adjoined her backyard. So even as a little person, I could leave my yard and walk right into Inez's backyard and down some steps and into her kitchen. And she always had something good to eat. Her kitchen smelled wonderful, like I imagined Mama Gardner's did. And she would have a cookie for me or something if I visited. She was the Earth Mother, the original Earth Mother. She raised her 3 children. She looked after the extended family. She helped her husband in his motor parts business. She was special as well. I will save my grandmother for last. And then there was Uncle Jack. He and my dad were in business together, and I saw a lot of him. He lived 1 block from us, but I saw him mostly at the oil company, and he always wanted me to sit on his knee and tell him the news. And sometimes I was really hard pressed to come up with some news, but I knew that if I would, that he would give me a nickel to drop in the coin container at the drink box, and then I could get a little Coca-Cola. So I tried very hard to tell the news and be a good conversationalist. And then there was Myra. And I thought Myra was really pretty, just like Ava. I loved to visit with her in Winston-Salem. And she had a son named Melvin, who was my age, and I have some really good memories growing up and playing with Melvin. So we were all, it was a very close-knit family overall. And last but not least was my grandmother, and I admire her so much. Not only was she easygoing and very loving, but she was strong, just like the other Gardner women. I mean, she was able to pull through some very, very difficult times, losing her husband at a very young age, but still being able to move forward, raising her two boys, running a country store that was the hub of the community, and continuing her farming operation. She didn't actually do the farming. She leased her farm land, but she still played a big role in keeping all of that going. So she was just amazing. Fortunately, all of the Gardner women were strong enough physically, emotionally, and mentally, which was a blessing, to be able to pull through difficult times when life was good for the most part, but life was not easy. So I admire that about the generations before me.
That's a wonderful lesson to learn from them, and to be able to look back on their lives and think how, the Bappy was born in the, early 1900s, and all the way down to Ava being born in, or the mid, the first bit of the 1900s, and then Ava being born in 1922, the age difference, and all of them coming to age through the Depression, through, having the challenges of World War II, and then all of the, things that they endured. And they did always seem to have this kind of forward momentum to keep going, to persevere, to be resilient, and to kind of, in their own way, whether they realized it or not, they really did kind of buck the trend or the kind of social expectations of the day for women. I mean, each of the women you described either ran their own business or worked in collaboration and partnership with their spouses to run these businesses, to run a household, to stay connected with each other, and find joy and happiness even in the face of challenges. And I think that's really remarkable. And I think, when we look at Ava Gardner's career and her life, we can certainly see the influence of that in the decisions she made in her career. And I'm just curious, in terms of your reflections on Ava and the decisions she made in terms of, being, taking that risk and going to Hollywood and having the studio career and then going out on her own. What are some of the connections you see with those influences from her older siblings?
I have noticed in recent years that a lot of the celebrities of that era are very critical of the studio system. And Ava was very vocal about that all along, and finally had the courage, although she was still under contract, to leave the United States and take up residence in Spain. And when I look at that from afar to this day, I wonder if I would have had the courage to do that, to be a young woman. I think she was in her 30s at the time, to just pick up, move to a foreign country where she did not speak the language, and establish a residence. That was a really gutsy move. And I think in doing that, she paved the way for many, many celebrities that followed her to do the same thing. But she was her own boss. She didn't like taking orders from her older siblings. And at times that caused conflict among them. But she lived life her own way, by her own rules. And that is just amazing, considering the time frame in which she lived. And I admire that very much.
And it's really impressive when you think about, she was still under contract with MGM. And at that time, the bulk of the, film output was being produced in and around Hollywood on the back lot, on the sound stages. And she decided that, in her effort to try and, find happiness and find, excitement and move to a place that stimulated her senses, that had interest in music and food and fashion and culture, and trying to just have a different life, a change of pace. She did make that decision, although she continued to come home and produce, work on films in Hollywood. She did make that choice, and that was very bold and courageous for the time. She also made that choice when when her contract with MGM ended, and she had an opportunity to really take ownership. You mentioned her not liking to take orders, so I can imagine that the structure of the studio contract and all of the parameters, both publicly and privately, that the studio contract demanded, she was always kind of flouting that and saying, no, oh, maybe when I'm 18 years old or 19 and just new to this, but as I get older and learn more, I'm going to make my own way and make my own path. And she certainly did that after her contract ended. Would you talk a little bit about that and kind of how she transitioned her career to be one that was more self-directed?
I think her first film after her contract ended, and you correct me on this, Laura, I know you really know a lot of details, you and Linnell both, about the career, but the first film post-contract was On the Beach. And she was enthusiastic to strike out on her own, although she was nervous about it. She was scared, and she admitted that, but she saw an opportunity to really make some money so that she could retire comfortably. And she received $400,000 for On the Beach. And that was, for the times, that was a really, really good salary for that movie, or compensation for the movie. She, I think there were some roles that she regretted having turned down, like The Graduate. But I think overall, she made some really good choices and put the icing on the cake, so to speak. Took a lot of courage, but she saw a lot of opportunity. So she just grabbed the bull by the horns, so to speak, and marched on.
Well, that's some really great information you shared about her career. You had the special vantage point of getting to know your Aunt Ava as a person, getting to know the real Ava Gardner behind the limelight and the glamour of Hollywood. I wonder if there's some traits or some characteristics in her personality that were also hallmarks of the other Gardner women that really stuck with you and have stayed with you over the years, that you have also tried to kind of emulate in your own life.
The thing that I cherished the most about who Ava really was her kindness, her compassion, and her generosity. To me, that is the most outstanding. That is the umbrella that overarches the real Ava Gardner. And there is one particular instance of this that has stayed with me for years and years. It has stayed with me all of my life. I was visiting with her in New York City, and we had been to a club in Greenwich Village, and we were leaving that club, and we encountered a severely handicapped man on the street corner. And others were passing him by and totally ignoring him. Still others were shouting at him and jeering at him and being very unkind. And Ava took in this whole scene, and she walked up to him. She introduced herself, not that she needed to, and struck up a conversation with him and spent a right good while talking with him. She introduced me to him, and I joined in the conversation. And as she was preparing to leave, she gathered up all of the money that she had on her person Plus, she asked for some money from her secretary who was escorting us that evening. She asked for some money from him, and she put it all together, and it was right much money, and she gave it to him. And then as we walked away, she leaned over and she whispered in my ear that we must also always be kind and be thankful for our good fortune in life. And I never forgot that. That was an example of where she was kind and generous to a stranger, but she was also kind and generous to her friends. We were staying in a suite at the Regency Hotel, and one of her celebrity friends had the suite above us. And she was visiting back and forth with this individual, and she came to realize that this individual was about to be asked to leave the Regency because the hotel bill was in arrears. And this individual was having some financial difficulty and could not take care of it. So Ava got on the telephone with her business manager, who at the time was Morgan Marie, and told him to pay the bill. And he pushed back, not wanting to do that. And so Ava told him a little louder to pay the bill. And this went on back and forth for a time or two. And then she finally said, pay the bill, and slammed the telephone down. But there was a 4-letter word in there too. So, you know, she was generous with friends. Her longtime companion and housekeeper, Carmen in London, tells about how she brought a complete stranger home with her from Hyde Park one day, took her to her closet and said, pick anything you want. Now, this was the closet where the haute couture gowns were kept. Can you imagine? And Franca.
I want to visit that closet. I want to go to that closet myself.
Franca, her couture designer friend, said that she was really sick with the flu once, and Ava called her on the phone and said, well, do you have anything? And Franca said, well, no. And it wasn't long after that that Ava arrived at her door with chicken soup and some medicine. So she was always thinking of others. There was nothing that made Ava happier than to be of assistance to her friends and others in need. And I absolutely adore that about our beloved Ava.
Those are great stories. It didn't necessarily have to be a friend. Like you said, it's just somebody that she ran into on the street, and she still showed that kind nature and generosity that you loved her so much for. And I love those stories, and it kind of brings us into the trust that Ava actually originally set up for beneficiaries in London. And you are now the co-trustee of the Ava Gardner Trust with your daughter, Ava Melissa. And some of the beneficiaries have changed, but it continues from when Ava first set it up. It has continued all of these years and distributes funds to these beneficiaries on an annual basis. Can you tell us a little bit more about the trust and how it got started and maybe evolved a bit, and who the beneficiaries are today?
I could talk a very long time about the history of the trust, but I will try to be brief. Ava herself established the trust in 1986. She established it to provide for her surviving sisters, which turned out to be the oldest, Bappy, and the youngest, Myra, directing that when they passed away, any residual funds or assets left in the trust were to be divided between the Queen Victoria Hospital in London and the Animal Health Trust in London. She also left a provision in the trust document that the sisters could change the beneficiaries. Bappy left them just as Ava had earmarked them. Myra did change them and included the Ava Gardner Museum. And the purpose of the trust has evolved through the years, but currently the trust has a twofold purpose. First of all, to preserve her legacy, specifically her legacy of giving, and secondly, to distribute any funds that come into the trust through the management of image rights, intellectual property to those beneficiaries. And they are the Ava Gardner Museum, which is a North Carolina registered nonprofit, the Queen Victoria Hospital in London, and now St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. St. Jude's replaced the Animal Health Trust that closed its doors permanently because of the impact of the pandemic. So I want everyone to remember or be aware that every time they buy an official Ava Gardner product, or a product that is sponsored by the Ava Gardner Trust, that they are supporting the Ava Gardner Museum, the Queen Victoria Hospital, and St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. And I think that Ava would be absolutely delighted that more than 30 years after her passing, she is still able to financially contribute.
I think it's important to note, and you won't say this because you are so kind, but it is important to make sure that people understand that Ava does not receive, our Ava Thompson does not receive any salary or compensation for her work as the trustee of the Ava Gardner Trust, nor does her daughter. They work tirelessly. The hours of time that Ava has spent protecting her image and making sure that the beneficiaries are taken care of has been amazing. At the Ava Gardner Museum, we very much appreciate that because it has certainly been a pleasure for me to work with you. And I appreciate it
very much. Thank you for those kind words.
And I'll second that. It's been such a delight and total joy to get to know you, Ava. And you're so kind to spend your time with us today and to have this conversation. And I think it's so important, you know, as we said kind of at the top of the episode, so many things have been written about Ava and her, to some degree, her extended family, and her whole life has been, you know, rather public, whether she would have liked that or not. But it's so great to see that today in 2021 that she is still so beloved by people all over the world. You know, we do quite a bit, the museum on social media, and we get to interact with fans, not just in North Carolina, but she has fans in every state and every country and every corner of the globe. And it's just so wonderful to see what she means to people and how she continues to be relevant. And as we've explored today, she came from this wonderful family of that was sometimes a source of conflict, and but mostly a huge system of support for her, and really helped shape her into the woman she became. And we at the Ava Gardner Museum, you know, Liddell and I are constantly emailing and texting each other most days, and just always finding new things about her that resonate with people today. The strength, the resiliency, the tenacity, the independence, the courage that not only she had, but her siblings had, and that they certainly did influence each other and mean a great deal to each other as a family. And I just think it's a wonderful story to tell. And I'm so grateful that you've joined us today to have this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And
it's always a pleasure to reminisce.
Yeah. And speaking of the museum, I would love if Linnell had just a minute to tell us a little bit about, we did have, for those of you who follow us on social media, you know that we did have a bit of a issue early at the beginning of the year with some issues with some plumbing and water mains and all that sort of stuff. But we've powered through that. And just like Ava, we have shown resilience and tenacity. I would love to get an update on where things stand with that so our fans can know what to expect in the weeks ahead.
I'm certainly trying to keep that resilience going, I'll tell you. We are, repairs are finished as of yesterday. They did one last thing yesterday and we are done with all the repairs. It was all building repairs. There were no issues, but there's no damage at all to any of the artifacts or anything that mattered. It was all building repairs that needed to be taken care of, but we have taken this opportunity to do a complete sort of facelift of the museum. We have new carpeting, new paint. We're going to put in 5 brand new exhibits, which is what we're working on right now. And when we reopen, and our official reopening date is May 22nd, so please come and join us. We will have a lot of wonderful new things to share with people that are coming in person. We will also have things to share online. So be sure and follow us on social media so you can keep track of what our new virtual exhibits are going to be like, some other Ava chats that we are planning. We have a lot of stuff going on. The pandemic and then the flood has given us a great opportunity to really open up the virtual world. And thanks to Laura, who is our social media manager, we have really gotten into more of the things that you can see online. Not everything has to be in person. So we would appreciate it if you follow us and keep an eye out for some upcoming events, and then come and see us on May 22nd, see the brand new opening of the new and improved Ava Gardner Museum.
That's wonderful. I know I'm excited. I've been missing being able to go into the museum in person. And as you said, we have really taken the opportunity that the pandemic presented us, if we want to call it that, with sort of refocusing things and looking for ways to expand how we connect with fans. That's certainly a lot of the work that I know the Trust does as well, to let the fans around the world find ways to engage with the museum and with the Trust and with all of the wonderful products and things that have been rolled out. And we do try to communicate rather robustly on social media. So we do encourage everyone to please visit our website at avagardner.org. On our website, we have a lot of great background information, history of the museum, history of Ava's life, or filmography, all of those wonderful resources. But we also have a very active blog that's on our website, and we're constantly sharing these kinds of wonderful stories about Ava, so you can get to know her beyond the films. We do take deep dives and look at all of her movies as well, but we also look at the person behind that. And we also share updates about things that are going on at the museum and things that are going on with the Trust, and have links and all sorts of goodies to help you find that information. And we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So please follow along with us as we continue to explore and share wonderful things about the life and legacy of Ava Gardner. So we appreciate everybody being here today. And this, we'll do a wrap up like we've done with our 2 previous Ava chats. We do a wrap up on our blog where we'll share a few additional resources, and we'll link to some of the specific blog posts that we've shared that talk about the Gardner family and talk about the wonderful work that Ava and her daughter do with the Trust. And then some of the fun products that are available. One was recently released, so we can link to that. So stay tuned for that and follow along with us in this journey. And again, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.